Welcome back to the panel discussion, Maximizing ROI Through Data Center Transformation, sponsored by Nutanix. My guests today, Darren Ash of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Chris Howard of Nutanix, Brigadier General Kevin Nally of the Marine Corps, and Fred Whiteside of the Labor Department. And gentlemen, one of the issues that we didn't get to, one of the issues that I want to address is exactly what it is that you're transforming. As I've watched congressional hearings, as I've read accounts of what you and your colleagues at other agencies have done, different people seem to have different ideas of what exactly you're transforming, and that is, what is a data center in the first place? Darren, let's start with you. How do you attack that when there seem to be these varying definitions of what it is you're supposed to be dealing with in the first place?
So, Francis, thank you. That's a great question. Actually, before I get to about the definition of a data center, I really want to first focus on why we do this in the first place. We don't do IT for IT's sake. We do it for the mission. And the thing that I think about, and you think about the old stories, and there may not be old stories across government or any organization, are the proverbial servers under the desktop, or the servers that are sitting in a closet that's unventilated. Those are the things that I worry about. And the reason I worry about that is, if that system or application that's residing on that server is not backed up, there's no disaster recovery, how is it that we're able to perform that aspect of the mission? And so the concept of data center transformation, data center optimization, or in effect doing this right, really gets to what do we need to do as a modern, effective organization to ensure the continuity of our mission. And that means that we run it efficiently, effectively, have the right equipment, green, all the things we've talked about, whether it's a closet or it's in a little room or in a vast warehouse. In my mind, it doesn't matter. What we need to focus on, what we have to focus on is set aside the definitions. What's the best and most effective way for us to run our enterprise? And that's what I want to focus on.
With portable computing, mobility, and so on in general, it seems to me that especially given the kinds of missions that you and your personnel undertake, you could have data centers all over the place, even on people now.
We look at it, we start from if you will, the foxhole, and work our way back to, I'll use the beltway, back to DC. So if it works from the foxhole back to DC, that's okay. That's okay with me at the enterprise level. And my challenge here in DC is a lot of focus is starting here in the beltway, and then they'll get you 2/3 to the fight, and then it's like, well, you got to figure out the rest. Well, that's not helping the warfighter out. So we in the Marine Corps focus on this is what the warfighter needs. How do we get it back into network? And we have consolidated some data centers. We still have more to go, but it will be more effective and reduce costs and secure and reduce costs and labor. But the challenge that I came into is I got a great plan from my predecessor, but we went from the Navy Marine Corps Internet. We decided to get out of that because the commanders lacked the flexibility to control the warfighting platforms riding on the network. So we decided to go government-owned, government-operated, and the contract was signed. And call it, the Department of Navy calls it the Next Generation Network. But we kind of don't use that term very much anymore. So we just call it the government-owned, government-operated Marine Corps Enterprise Network. But you're right, and then not to take up too much time, but we're looking at, we've got it recently approved through NSA. We call it the Trusted Handheld, which will be a tactical device or garrison device that the security will be embedded in the kernel. So eventually you'll have be able to use that device for personal use or organizational use. But the trusted green piece, if you will be able to be used on the battlefield. And we have a device that's been procured, and it's out at California right now. They're using, Marines out there use it. It's called Networking on the Move, which allows the commander to actually walk away from the vehicle 300-400 yards, talk back to the vehicle talks back to a point of presence suite, and then that goes back up into the cloud and back into our enterprise network. So we're tied in from each one of our Marine Expeditionary Forces in Okinawa, California, Camp Lejeune, out to the battlefield or the ships.
Fred, wrestling with the definition of a data center, what was that process like at Labor, given the moving target that definition seems to have become?
Well, obviously it impacted planning to some degree, and your ability to assess what you have. But I think that, like Darren mentioned, there's been this long-standing problem with organizations creating small capabilities that they control that, from an enterprise perspective, are sort of below the radar. So everybody knew that was a bit of an issue. So I don't think that the definition really impacted you as much as some may have let on. It was important, obviously, from a reporting perspective, but logistically, I don't think it really impacted things much. Everybody knew what the problem was and exactly what needed to be done to fix it, and most pursued it once the program began.
Chris, is that your observation from the vendor side? I mean, Darren, I think, spoke very eloquently about the idea that the point of this is not technology. The point of this is mission execution. That gets to also what General Nally talked about and what Fred has talked about at Labor. Do we maybe get hung up too much sometimes on the technology, names and definitions and all of that stuff at the expense of the execution pieces?
Absolutely. I mean, the whole consolidation initiative, take, for instance, one of the branches of the military, they maybe thought they had 100 data centers, when in reality, based on the definition that was put out there, they had 470. Because the definition was very narrow, very specific, whatever it is, 300 square feet with a rack or a power cord or whatever the definition is. But, that's good. We have to consolidate the data centers, but you can't lose focus of the mission-critical applications that you're delivering. And whether you deliver that from one data center or 200, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter as long as you're fulfilling the mission and everything's still 100% effective. So just going out there and saying, take 50 of those and close them down, call that a win. That's not a win unless you're still being effective in delivering whatever it is, whether it's a military app or a federal civilian app. So yeah, I think that the key focus should be on what's the mission requirements and are we doing a good job of delivering that to the consumers of those applications. Closing data centers is important, but that's not a win by just shutting down a building.
Fred, how did you stay away from that concept? That traditionally has been the way agencies want to do it. Let's check off a list, or let's do certain numbers, certain percentages, whatever, and as Chris says, call that a win. How'd you avoid that at Labor?
Well, again, I think I sort of touched on it before, and that is that everybody knew it was a problem, and there are many of us who wanted to solve this and attack this issue of data centers under desk. Mm-hmm. So I think we really just we looked across our enterprise and just figured out what needed to be done from a disaster recovery perspective, from a redundancy and efficiency perspective, and just sort of let OMB work out their definitions and they did. They slowly worked through it. But again, if you like Darren said, if you're actually approaching IT and you're approaching IT with business mission and in mind and supporting services, then I think you know what needs to be done, and that's how we approached it. And so far it's worked for us pretty efficiently. Yeah.
I want to talk about the change management piece of this because, again, to follow up on Darren's point, that this is not just IT for the sake of IT, and we're not just changing for the sake of changing. And I'll start with you, Darren, since you brought it up. Tell me about the change management piece of this from a people perspective. We've talked about the business plan. It's in the process of execution. The technology piece of it is fine. Where these things seem to succeed or fail is in how you get the stakeholders, who you identified earlier, to be engaged, to be involved, to buy in, and to proceed. That's where I want to go next.
If I use two words maybe to dive into this question, it would be control and trust. And that is probably those are two, in my mind, two of the bigger areas of change and change management. In a traditional sense, where the data centers and all the servers are dispersed throughout the organization, different locations, individuals are in control of those boxes for different reasons. A change in moving those servers, moving those applications to a more centralized location, or again, an optimized situation, takes away from that control. And that control may have been designed for certain reasons, whether because of the care and feeding that was necessary for those applications or for those boxes, or for other reasons. So that change aspect has to be managed and recognized up front. The second piece gets back to the trust, because if some of this ends up in a more centralized type of environment, where it is consolidated or optimized into a few locations or the right number of locations, you've got to ensure that we trust the capacities there, the connections are there, and when I say connection, riding the bandwidth. All those types of things have to be factored in. Do we have everything thought through that we can trust it? And trust the organization that's also managing it, whether it's the government organization that's managing it or the private sector organization that's managing it.
General Nally, the change management issue at the Marine Corps, the perception, at least from the outside, is a little different than the civilian organizations. The perception is that, well, he can just tell people to do things and they'll do them because he outranks them. That may or may not be true, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing it because they understand the value to the organization. They're doing it because he told me I have to. So talk about developing the elements that Darren talked about in your change management plan when you're executing something like data center transformation.
Okay, Francis, so I'll take it from the bottom up first and then from the top down second. So from the bottom up, if my Marines or civilians or contractors come up with a great idea, or from the operating forces a great, C4 IT cloud type idea, and they bring it to me as a requirement, then I have to sell this to our deputy commandants, which are the 3 stars, to show them the value of this and how it's going to enhance a commander's decision making ability to critical time and critical location. And then what's it going to cost? Because in this budget constrained environment we're in right now, for the next 10 years probably, it comes down to money at the end of the day. That's the first way. The top-down approach is even actually a little bit easier, as you alluded to on the perception piece, because I can remember barely a year into the job, the commandant calls me in his office at 1400 on an afternoon, and very collegial talk, and he says, Kevin, he says, I want every Marine to have the same service that I have, and that includes privates. And I said, yes, sir, that's the easiest mission statement I can think of, and I use that to this day when I'm asking my people what we need to do. I'm saying every Marine needs to have the same level of service that the Commandant has. That carries a lot of weight.
That strikes me that is powerful all the way down at the private level.
Well, it shows the Commandant's care and concern. I mean, he's so concerned about those very junior Marines that he wants to make sure that they have the ability to conduct the missions that he asks them to conduct in an effective and efficient manner and to save lives.
Mm-hmm. Change management piece at Labor, Fred, and this isn't an issue where you have a lot of end users, non-technology people, who can see a difference between how their app ran before and how it runs now. But there are plenty of people that you needed to bring along, I imagine, as Darren talked about, especially in the care and feeding realm of this, and especially as we think about the integration we talked about earlier, moving to the cloud and virtualization applications.
Yeah, I think the ugly truth of the migration of consolidation of data centers, of course, and then the migration to the cloud is that it changes people's lives. People who actually work in various capacities now, those jobs no longer exist, for better or for worse. As taxpayers, I think that's a good thing. We're saving money, and I think all of us as taxpayers will applaud that. However, I've often said that a year is an eternity in this business, and I think it's very important for people who earn their living in this field to understand that there's always an opportunity to reinvent yourself. If you think about the technologies that we use today, most of them are not really have not been around that long. Mm-hmm. An expert has been doing it 5 years. You see what I mean? So there's always an opportunity to gain new skills and adapt one's skills to stay gainfully employed and in front of the technology, and I think that is the reality of the world we live in now. So I know many people are uncomfortable with that reality, but that is the way that unfortunately we're going to save money. Of course, it creates opportunities in other areas. You have very large cloud service providers that are expanding capabilities every day. They need skilled people. So these jobs don't necessarily go away; they transform, and I think that's really the important point here. Yeah.
Chris Howard of Nutanix, the change management piece of this again. Who's the people who have done it successfully? What have they done to do so? The people who have struggled, where have they struggled with the change management part here?
The people that have done it successfully take a lot of time and effort up front before they do any of these changes, whether that's a certain initiative around, virtual desktops or cloud or whatever it is, but they do a lot of upfront work to make sure that their users are comfortable, the consumers of whatever technology they're delivering are comfortable with whatever the change is and have trust, as Darren said, in that the service levels are still going to be provided, the accessibility of the environment is going to be provided regardless of what the use case is. So those people that take the time up front to work with their end users are generally more successful. The ones that aren't successful are more do stuff on a shotgun approach and just make a wholesale change, and then I don't care if you're delivering it effectively, your users aren't going to be happy. They're just not. They'll fight it tooth and nail just because they weren't involved, they had no say in it. If it's a virtual desktop initiative, they don't like the new device or whatever it is. So I think the more time you take up front to work with your people, gain the trust that you're going to deliver the applications in the same way you've been delivering them, you're going to provide the same level, if not better, SLAs, I think you'll be successful, maybe not 100% of the time, but certainly more than you will without taking them into consideration before you do whatever the change is that you're going to make.
Chris Howard of Nutanix, one of the participants in our panel discussion today. Fred Whiteside of the Labor Department, Brigadier General Kevin Nally of the Marine Corps, and Darren Ash of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission also joining us. You're listening to the panel discussion, Maximizing ROI Through Data Center Transformation, sponsored by Nutanix on Federal News Radio 1500 AM.